Welcome back to Random History. I'm your navigator as we explore the little known events and people that make history such an amazing subject. These are not the stories that you would have studied in school. In fact, if you have heard about them, you're likely to think that they could not possibly be real. But they are. Today we're plunging into one of Europe's longest, strangest, and most consequential conflicts, the 80 Years' War, or sometimes known as the Dutch Revolt. From 1568 till 1648, a ragtag coalition of merchants, sailors, farmers, and Calvinist firebrands fought the mightiest empire on earth, Habsburg Spain, for their faith, their freedoms, and their future. But we're not just going to skim the surface. We're going to focus on one jaw-dropping episode that sounds like a Hollywood script, the so-called Battle on Skates, or the Battle of Ishilmir. Picture this: Spanish tercios, Europe's elite infantry, slipping and sliding on the frozen canals while Dutch rebels glide past on wood-bladed skates, muskets blazing, turning winter into a weapon. This wasn't a footnote. It was a perfect microcosm of why, sometimes, underdogs win. So stick around as we trace the war's origins, deep dive into the Siege of Haarlem, where skates changed history, follow the revolt's twists through the mutinies and the Golden Age triumphs, and finally wrap up with why this 80-year slog still matters. Let's lace up and glide right in. To do this story justice, I really should begin with a little bit of background. The Protestant Reformation ignited on October 31st, 1517, when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to Wittenberg Castle's church door, blasting the church's sale of indulgences, papal claims over purgatory, and ripping several books out of the Bible. Luther insisted on the idea of sola scriptura, Scripture alone, and sola fide, salvation by faith alone. Pope Leo X excommunicated Luther in 1521. The Western Church fractured forever. Yet this split deepened far beyond Luther when a young French lawyer, John Calvin, fled Catholic persecution and settled in Geneva, Switzerland. In 1536, he published the first edition of his masterpiece, Institutes of the Christian Religion, a systematic blueprint for Reformed Christianity. Calvin agreed with Luther on grace and faith, but pushed it even further. God's absolute sovereignty, total human depravity, and the doctrine of predestination, which means that God chooses the saved before they are even born, independent of human merit or works. Calvinists reduced the sacraments to two, baptism and a spiritual Lord's Supper. He also embraced the priesthood of all believers. Geneva became a disciplined, quote, Bible commonwealth, where moral oversight, education, and hard work testified to one's election. Catholics responded with fire. The Church upheld the seven sacraments, transubstantiation, which is the Eucharist becoming the body and blood of Christ during Mass, papal and conciliar authority alongside Scripture, as well as salvation through faith, good works, and grace. You see, for Catholics, free will matters. Humans can accept or reject God's offer of salvation. In 1539, Cardinal Jacopo Sodoleto wrote Geneva's magistrates, urging them to return to Catholic unity and tradition for salvation. Calvin's blistering reply defended his Reformation and its so-called return to apostolic purity. He said, quote, the Church stood on the side of Micaiah against the false consensus. As Darman McCulloch notes in The Reformation, A History, Calvin's emphasis on predestination and a visible elect community created a stark contrast with Catholicism's sacramental and hierarchical worldview. Lutherans occupied a middle ground, but Reformed and Catholic visions clashed on authority, salvation, and the role of law, which fueled the wars of religion shaping modern individualism, capitalism, and democracy. By 1561, the Second Helvetic Convention codified the Reformed tradition. The Council of Trent condemned Protestant tenets, cementing the divide. Yet, both sides claimed to restore true Christianity. This is where our story begins, the 1550s. Philip II of Spain inherited the 17 provinces of the Netherlands from his father, Charles V. These were booming trade hubs. Antwerp was Europe's richest city, but they were a patchwork of autonomous duchies, counties, and cities jealous of each other's privileges. Philip, a devout Catholic absolutist, ruling from Madrid, saw heresy everywhere. The Protestant Reformation had taken root. Calvinism especially appealed to the urban middle class. In addition to the religious tensions, high taxes to fund Spain's wars, plus the Inquisition's shadow, lit the fuse. And in 1566 came the Beeldenstorm, the iconoclastic fury, where mobs smashed Catholic statues in churches across the north of the Netherlands. Philip responded with steel. In 1567, he sent Fernando Alvarez de Toledo, the Duke of Alba, with 10,000 troops. Alba's Council of Troubles, nicknamed the Council of Blood, executed thousands, including the noblemen Egmont and Horn. As Geoffrey Parker writes in his book, The Dutch Revolt, Alba's regime turned a religious protest into a national war. William of Orange fled Germany and began raising armies. The first clashes came in 1568 at Heiligerie, but the real explosion hit in 1572 when the Sea Beggars, pirate-like Calvinist exiles, captured the city of Braille. Towns across Holland and Zeeland joined the revolt, but it was the siege of Haarlem where skates enter our story. Haarlem, a prosperous cloth town 10 miles from Amsterdam, refused Spanish terms in 1572. Don Frederique de Toledo, Alba's son, surrounded it with 30,000 men. The defenders, maybe 4,000 regulars plus citizens, men, women, even children. Food ran out fast. The people ate dogs, cats, shoe leather. Yet morale held thanks to figures like Kino Simon-Dochter Hassler, the legendary woman who led female militias and became a national symbol for the Netherlands. The winter of 1572 and 3 was brutal, part of what the scientists call the Little Ice Age. Canals and the Holmermeer, which was a large inland tidal lake, they froze solid. Spanish commanders saw opportunity. The ice could let troops bypass the defenses of the city and storm the walls or cut supply lines. But the Dutch knew the ice, pretty much like the Spaniards knew the Americas. Here's where the battle on skates begins. Spanish accounts from the time describe Dutch fighters, sea beggars and local militia, strapping on early wood-bladed skates, 2 sharpened slats attached to wooden soles tied to their shoes. These weren't recreational toys. These were the tools of survival in a waterlogged land. Messengers glided silently at night through Spanish lines to reach Prince William of Orange, carrying pleas for help. Children skated supplies across the ice under fog cover. The clash peaked in late January 1573. Spaniards launched a major assault, briefly seizing the city gates, but they were turned back. Then came the harassment. Dutch skaters darted out in small groups, arquebuses, which were long-barreled muskets, locked and loaded. They would skate out, fire a volley, skate backwards or sideways at speeds no armored infantryman could match. They'd reload behind snow barriers or thin ice traps, and then strike again. Spanish troops, unused to the slick surface, stumbled in formation. Their pikes, which it's like a long spear but it has an axe for a head, they were useless. Their horses slipped. The Spanish lines were pure chaos. A Spanish captain named Bernardino de Mendoza recorded the battle vividly in his diary. He said, quote, "They had some kind of spurs, two sharp staples on a board of iron, to allow standing on the ice without slipping, and to keep so and walk and fight. Why, the Duke Alba, had ordered 7,000 of them thus." This report is actually backed up by further research from the Netherlands themselves. Anyway, Alba himself reportedly sent a captured pair of skates to Philip II with a note of astonishment. The king immediately ordered 7,000 pairs manufactured and commanded his troops to train with them on ice, a rare admission of tactical inferiority by the Spanish. One report has Dutch skaters forcing the Spanish out onto thinner ice and then watching the armored men crash through into the freezing water. Quote, "It was a thing never heard of before today, to see a body of musketeers fighting like that on a frozen sea." In the battle, hundreds of Spaniards fell. Dutch losses were minimal. This wasn't decisive of the siege. Haarlem ultimately would surrender in July of 1573. Then its garrison massacred in violation of the terms of surrender. But it did buy the Dutch crucial time. William was able to organize relief for other cities, and the psychological blow to Spanish invincibility was immense. As Anton van der Lem notes, the winter warfare revealed the Dutch mastery of their own terrain. Haarlem's fall didn't break the revolt. It inspired Leiden's epic 1574 defense, where the dikes were cut and flooded the land so that a relief fleet could sail all the way into the flooded territory. The Spanish Fury sackings in Antwerp unified the provinces in the eventual pacification of Ghent. By 1579, the Union of Utrecht bound the northern provinces into kind of a proto-republic. Alexander Farnese, Duke of Parma, reconquered the south brilliantly in the 1580s, but the northern geography, the rivers, the bogs, and yes, seasonal ice, kept him from the north. Spanish logistics strained across multiple fronts: France, England, the Turks. Parker famously argued the revolt lasted 80 years because Philip's empire was just overstretched. He couldn't concentrate his force. And then enters Maurice of Nassau, William of Orange's son. From 1588 to 1598, we call this the 10 years, he professionalized the Dutch army, meaning he provided regular pay, drill, training in scientific sieges and military tactics. Combined with the Seebeckers' naval dominance, thanks in large part to the British defeat of the Spanish Armada, the North secured independence, at least in practice. Skates weren't the only innovation. Dutch engineers flooded fields deliberately. They called it the inundation tactic. And then they would use windmills to pump the water back out. The war dragged into the early 17th century, merging with the 30 Years' War. The 12 Years' Truce gave the Dutch breathing room to build the world's first stock exchange, a global trading empire through the Dutch East Indies Company. When fighting did resume, Dutch fleets ruled the waves. In 1648, the Peace of Münster recognized the United Provinces as sovereign, the first modern republic to defeat an empire. After all, it came, 130 years before the U.S. became the U.S. The southern Netherlands remained part of the Spanish Empire. Later, due to all the marriages and everything, it had become part of Austria and then unite into the country of Belgium. The battle on skates symbolized something much deeper, though, a concept called asymmetry. Spain had gold, the tercios, and the zeal of the Inquisition. The Dutch had local knowledge, adaptability, and winter as an ally. Iron skates refined in the 1570s turned a frozen disadvantage into asymmetric warfare. As Olaf van Nimwegen and his colleagues detail in their comprehensive military history, terrain and seasonal conditions repeatedly frustrated Spanish superiority in open battle. If nothing else, imagine the propaganda value. Dutch pamphlets celebrated skating heroes defeating the Iron Duke's legions. It boosted recruitment, foreign sympathy, after all, Elizabeth I sent all kinds of aid, as well as building morale during the starvation sieges that the Spanish imposed. The 80 Years' War birthed the Dutch Golden Age, Rembrandt, Spinoza, Tulip Mania, and a tolerant republic that welcomed Huguenots and Jews. It proved small states could win through resilience and innovation. The Skates incident reminds us that war isn't just generals. It's ordinary people weaponizing their environment. And now, from the frozen waterways of the Dutch Revolt to the steamy, enemy-infested jungles of Vietnam 4 centuries later, history repeatedly shows how determination, adaptation to your environment, and unbreakable resolve can turn the tide against superior odds. For today's True Hero segment, we're stepping into the jungles of Vietnam in 1968 for a story so intense that, again, if it were a movie script, you'd call it unbelievable. This is the story of Master Sergeant Roy P. Benavides, a Texas kid who rose from orphan poverty to become one of the most decorated soldiers in U.S. Army history. His actions on a single May morning saved at least 8 lives and earned him the Medal of Honor in one of the most extraordinary displays of courage ever recorded. Let's start with the man himself. Roy Perez Benavides was born on 5 August 1935 in the tiny community of Lindenau near Cuero, Texas. He was of Mexican-American and Yaqui Indian heritage. Tragedy struck early in his life. Both parents died of tuberculosis when he was just 7. Roy and his younger brother Roger were raised by their grandfather, an uncle, and an aunt in El Campo. Money was tight. Roy attended school only when he could, but eventually he'd drop out at the age of 15 to work full-time picking crops and helping keep the family afloat. For a lot of kids, life could have ended there. But for Roy, well, he had something unbreakable inside. In 1952, he enlisted in the Texas Army National Guard during the Korean War era. By June of 1955, he switched to active duty, entering the regular Army from Houston. He completed airborne training and landed with the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg. Eventually, he'd earn his way into the elite 5th Special Forces Group, the Green Berets. His first tour in Vietnam came in 1965 as an advisor. During a patrol, he stepped on a landmine. The blast shredded his bodies. Doctors looked at him and said he'd never walk again. Roy's response? Well, he spent a year in the hospital, secretly pushing himself through an unsanctioned rehab regimen that probably would have made most men quit. One day, he simply walked out of that hospital on his own 2 feet, determined to get back to Vietnam and help his fellow soldiers. By 1968, now Staff Sergeant Benavides, he was assigned to Detachment Bravo 56, 5th Special Forces Group, Airborne, 1st Special Forces, at the Forward Operating Base in Lac Ninh, right on the edge of some of the fiercest fighting along the Cambodian border. On the morning of 2 May 1968, a 12-man Special Forces reconnaissance team inserted by helicopter into dense jungle west of Lac Ninh. Their mission was straightforward, but dangerous. Gather intel on confirmed large-scale North Vietnamese Army activity. The area was enemy country, controlled and routinely patrolled by the NVA. The team had barely been on the ground when they were hit hard. They radioed for emergency extraction. 3 helicopters tried to get in. all three driven off by intense small arms and anti-aircraft fire. Wounded aircrew members and shot-up aircraft limped their way back to Loc Ninh. At the forward base, Staff Sergeant Benavides was monitoring the radio traffic. He heard the desperate calls. He saw the battered helicopter land. And, without hesitation, he grabbed every medical supply he could carry and volunteered to go back out on the next helicopter. According to the official Medal of Honor citation from the Congressional Medal of Honor Society, he, quote, voluntarily boarded a returning aircraft to assist in another extraction attempt, close quote. From the air, the scene looked grim. The 12-man team was either dead or too wounded to reach the pickup zone. Benavides directed the pilot to a nearby clearing, then jumped from the hovering helicopter, about a 10-foot drop, and sprinted roughly 75 meters through withering small arms fire. Before he even reached the team, he was hit. Right leg, face, head. Blood was pouring, but he kept moving. He immediately took command, repositioned the survivors, directed the defensive fire, threw smoke canisters to guide the extraction helicopter in. Despite his wounds and under constant enemy fire, he carried and dragged half of the wounded and dead soldiers to the aircraft. Then he ran alongside it, laying down protective fire so the rest could be loaded. Enemy fire grew heavier. Benavides realized the team leader was still out there, and he was carrying critical classified documents. Roy raced back through the bullets, reached the body, recovered those papers. At the exact moment, he was slammed again. Small arms fire tore into his abdomen, and grenade fragments ripped into his back. Almost simultaneously, the extraction helicopter's pilot took a fatal hit. The aircraft spun out of control and crashed nearby. Benavides, now in critical condition, still secured the documents, fought his way to the wreckage, and pulled the stunned survivors out of the overturned Huey and organized them into a defensive perimeter. Under increasing automatic weapons fire, grenade fire, he moved around the position, handing out the last water and ammunition, encouraging the men to keep fighting. Facing a buildup of enemy troops, he called in tactical airstrikes and directed supporting gunships to buy time for another rescue attempt. While administering first aid to a teammate, he was hit again, this time in the thigh. Still, he refused to stop. He began ferrying the remaining wounded to a new extraction helicopter. On his second trip, an NVA soldier clubbed him from behind. In brutal hand-to-hand combat, Roy took bayonet wounds to the head and arms before killing his attacker. He kept going. Reaching the aircraft, he spotted two more enemy soldiers rushing it from a blind angle to the door gunner. He dropped them both. With almost no strength left, he made one final trip back to the perimeter. He ensured that every piece of classified material was either collected or destroyed, and brought in the last of the wounded. Only then, after 6 straight hours of non-stop combat, suffering more than 30 wounds, eyes caked shut with blood, jaw dislodged, only then did Roy allow himself to be pulled aboard the rescue helicopter. He passed out the moment it cleared the jungle canopy. His actions that day saved at least 8 American lives. The official citation puts it best, quote, his gallant choice to join voluntarily his comrades who were in critical straits to expose himself constantly to withering enemy fire, and his refusal to be stopped despite numerous severe wounds, saved the lives of at least 8 men. His fearless personal leadership, tenacious devotion to duty, and extremely valorous actions in the face of overwhelming odds were in keeping with the highest traditions of the military service and reflect the utmost credit on him and the United States Army." Close quote. Benavides initially received the Distinguished Service Cross for his heroism. Years later, when a surviving team member finally came forward with the eyewitness testimony required for the Medal of Honor, only then was the award upgraded. On 24 February 1981, President Ronald Reagan personally presented it to him at the Pentagon. Reagan read the citation aloud in the courtyard and called it one of the most extraordinary acts of valor he had ever known. After retiring as a master sergeant in 1976, Roy returned to El Campo with his wife and 3 children. He earned a college degree and spent the rest of his life speaking to young people across Texas and beyond. His message was simple but powerful. An education is the key to success. Bad habits and bad company will ruin you. He became a living example that no matter how hard life starts, you can overcome it if you refuse to quit. Roy P. Benavides passed away on 29 November 1998 at the age of 63. He was buried with full military honors at Fort Sam Houston National Cemetery in San Antonio, Texas. Today, the U.S. Navy ship USNS Benavides bears his name. Schools, community centers, and memorials across the country carry his legacy. But Roy never sought the spotlight. He simply lived by the Green Beret creed, leave no man behind. That single day in May of 1968, west of Loch Ninh, wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a master class in courage under fire, in leadership when everything was falling apart, and in the kind of unbreakable will that defines the very best of our military tradition. Stories like Roy's are why I do this podcast, to make sure that these lesser-known heroes are never forgotten. This brings us to the end of another edition of Random History. If this episode hit you as hard as it hit me, share it with someone. Drop a review, tell a friend. And remember, the next time life tells you to quit, think about that Texas kid who spit in a doctor's face, walked out of a hospital on legs they said would never work again, and then walked straight into hell to drag his brothers out. Once again, I want to thank you, the listeners, for staying with me through this journey, and of course, my incredible wife who continues to inspire me, and without whom I'd be lost. So, as always, until next time, make some history of your own. Navigator out.